Thanks. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee's Budget Work Group. Today is Monday, March 18th, and we'll be here from, 12:03 to 1:30. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Since we don't have a chair yet for this work group, I will help facilitate today's meeting. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I just want to share some meeting logistics. I think maybe June had to step away, but there is a slide with meeting logistics that I will go over. Today's meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, and a copy of the meeting recording will be posted on the transition webpage under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, you can click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks in attendance can view the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can put questions or comments into the Q&A. We may not answer all the questions live during the meeting, but we do read them and they also become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we aren't taking verbal public comment, but folks can submit public comment at any time by calling 311, going to the transition website, or by emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov. And if you do want to give verbal public comment to the Government Transition Advisory Committee, you can do so at their next meeting on April 9th. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, we're going to do some work group business. We are going to set our goals for community engagement in the city's budget process, share the peer city research that we did, and then identify kind of our first set of stakeholders. And before we adjourn, we will do next steps or homework, depending on how you want to think about it. Next slide, please. So Money did email, I think, all of us this morning that she couldn't make today's meeting. I do have access to her peer city research that we can talk about. The rest of you are here. The first order of business is we need to approve the February 28th meeting summary that I sent out a week ago today. Does anybody have any proposed revisions or corrections before I take a motion?
I move approval.
Thank you, Fred. Do I have a second?
I'll second. This is Zach.
Thank you, Zach. All those in favor, hands up. Zoom hand, actual hand.
Aye.
Great. So those pass. Next slide, please. So it's the next order of business is to appoint our first chair rotation. The roles of the chair are on this slide. I'm not going to go over them. Just like in any of our bodies, the chair position can rotate in a frequency not determined, right? So you all can decide. And unlike the other groups, we're just going to have a single chair because of the size of the group. Terry has volunteered to serve in the first rotation. Thank you, Terry. Any questions, comments before I take a motion? Great. Can I get a motion from someone?
I move that Terry be our chair.
Thank you, Fred. Can I get a second?
Duration to be determined.
This is Zach. I'll second.
Thank you, Zach. All those in favor, Zoom hand, actual hand. Great. Thank you. And thank you, Terry. So Terry and I will work together on the next agenda, and Terry will facilitate the next work group meeting. Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it. Next steps, or sorry, next slide. So the last order of business is to go over the working agreements. I'll read them because I'm here. Our expectations of each other include: in discussions, challenge ideas rather than individuals, offer constructive suggestions. 2, approach different opinions with curiosity, seek to understand. 3, keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work. 4, arrive on time and prepared to the best of your ability. Let the group know if you are unable to attend a meeting. The co-chairs or chair will aim to incorporate tools for breathers. 5, keep multitasking to a minimum. 6, keep focus on the objectives of the meetings. Utilize the chair to note additional topics for discussion by submitting topics in writing via email. Next slide, please. 7, honor the decisions of the group. 8, contribute to the overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meet your needs. 9, step up, step back, collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard. 10, embrace conflict and work with your fellow committee members and staff to find ways to give each other feedback. The chair will aim to incorporate various feedback tools. And 11, use I statements. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the last thing before we kind of move into the more substantive part of the agenda is reviewing a revised timeline. So I revised our initial timeline at the request of some of you from the first meeting to make sure that our timeline was going to be aligned with the city budget office's timeline. Folks generally were requesting an accelerated timeline. This one, just to get to your initial draft recommendation, shaves about a month off from the one that you saw at the end of February. I also aligned this timeline with the districts and council operations subcommittee's timeline. That subcommittee is also releasing a set of recommendations in June. And to me, it makes sense to do a package of recommendations, because then we're going to spend the summer doing community engagement rather than kind of 2 sets of recommendations on separate issues. I think it'll also help with, this group is small. And so then we can really do unified community engagement over the summer, and we're not doing sort of separate engagement processes with different groups of GTAC members. So in order to release recommendations in June, we need GTAC to consider and sort of forward these recommendations for public comment at the May 15th GTAC meeting. So I built this timeline in order to get us there. And what it means is that to the extent we're doing early stakeholder engagement, so engagement prior to the release of the draft recommendations, we would really need to do that engagement in April. So you would have, 3 more work group meetings, 1 in a couple weeks to kind of finalize the proposals in the engagement plan, 1 after the early engagement period to revise your recommendations based on any engagement you do. And then a final one after the GTAC meeting to revise your recommendations based on any feedback you get from GTAC. So I just want to pause there. Timelines can evolve. Nothing about this is inherently set in stone, but I just wanted to check in whether that kind of meets folks' expectations about what you were asking for last time, or if you have any reflections or proposed changes to this timeline.
I think this helps a lot compared to the old timeline. Get it and aligning it with the district's commit subcommittee would make sense.
Great, thanks, Terry. Any other reflections seeming okay for now as a timeline to move forward with?
I like that June is when the council adopts the 24-25 budget, and probably the bureaus and in their respective service areas start the new budget process. So it's a good time, I think, to be putting our recommendations out, not just for public input, but for the bureaucracy to digest them.
Definitely.
So I like the timing a lot. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Fred. So we can continue to look at this at future work group meetings, but for now we'll kind of proceed with this timeline. And I appreciate folks' feedback about the timeline at our last meeting. I feel better about this one myself, so appreciate the feedback. Okay, next slide, please. So going into kind of the first substantive part of our work, we really want to set the goals for improving community engagement in the city's budget process. These goals ultimately should help you draft your recommendations, right? We want to make sure that your recommendations are forwarding what you've established as your goals. I want to thank the work group members who took time to build these. We kind of started with what the city budget office proposed last time. Then we looked at the transition community engagement plan that many of you helped draft and kind of expanded on that. And so there's a vision, there's like a values and guiding principles, and then there's objectives. I sent these out. I don't remember, I apologize. It was anyway, sometime probably last week. But I'll go over them, and let me go through all three components, and then we have time to reflect or make any changes. So next slide, please. So the vision is that we expect community education and engagement in the city's new budget process to amplify Portlanders' voices in the city budget process and grow our democracy, promote public trust in city finances and budget policy making, increase public awareness and understanding of how our city budget process works, and improve city decision-making and responsiveness to community interests and concerns. Next slide, please. So the values and guiding principles are adhered to and expect to be held accountable to the city's core values of anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility. Be transparent with the public about how the city gathers information, deliberates, and makes decisions, and recognize the city's responsibility for clear, consistent, and accurate public communications. Recognize that community engagement is a core competency for budget policy practitioners and should be a top priority for policymakers. Recognize that poor community engagement processes are often a waste of time for community and staff, can be counterproductive, leading to cynicism and frustration of community members. Build on community momentum, act with urgency, and pace the city's work in consideration of community capacity to participate, and develop equitable public education and engagement strategies that eliminate barriers to participation, are culturally specific and relevant, delivered through trusted mediums, and compensate community for their expertise. Next slide, please. And this is the final kind of set, and then we'll open it up. So these are the objectives. We'd want to make sure that our recommendations are advancing. So have engagement sufficiently early in the budget process to be meaningful, continuous communications, and return to communities at each phase so they know they were heard and understand how their ideas were used by and informed the city's decision-making. Be honest and straightforward about risks and rewards, hard requirements and options, and true consequences of budget decisions and trade-offs in the present and in the future to deepen community understanding of the city's budget. Provide ample opportunities for residents to share which programs and services are valued most and how to prioritize in conditions of fiscal constraints or conditions with fiscal opportunities. Collaborate and build partnerships because groups outside of the city have knowledge, relationships, and expertise that government lacks. Next slide, please. Invest the education and engagement resources in communities that have been traditionally left out of City Hall and city decision-making, including Black, Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latinx, Latina, people of color, people with disabilities, immigrants and refugees, non-English speaking communities, people under the age of 25, houseless Portlanders, people who live east of 82nd Avenue, and the LGBTQIA+ community. Support multiple diversified pathways and venues to hear from communities and support the development and delivery of culturally appropriate education and engagement opportunities that cannot be replicated with a one-size-fits-all approach. And finally, build robust, both qualitative and quantitative evaluation and feedback into the outreach and engagement processes and apply learning to future engagement efforts. So I know that was a lot. I did send it before. Again, it's very much modeled kind of framework wise on the transition community engagement plan. But yeah, I just want to open it up for questions, reflections, proposed revisions. It's all
I'll
on me.
say, I mean, I'll go ahead and pipe up.
Yeah.
Um, thanks to Julia for editing and consolidating a bunch of brainstorms that I had thrown in there. And I think the transition engagement plan was actually really well done and helpful and easily adaptable on a lot of the key concepts. But the budget engagement in particular, I think, was important to get in there. I think this does a good job of doing it. One tricky part that I had when I was brainstorming is negotiating the line between the budget process itself and the community engagement associated with it. And that budget process itself could be better.
Could be what, Terry?
Could be better.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly putting more engagement earlier and more public communications earlier and documents earlier and all that sort of things. I think that's something that the budget office should consider as we consider this.
Well, and I was kind of thinking along the same lines, if I might speak up, that from what we heard from Tim and the budget office, that they are trying to develop a new budget process, but they're also using the old budget process, like with the different bureau advisory, citizen advisory budget. I don't have the citizen budget advisory committees. So there's still some of these individuated inputs that may be siloed because really we don't have deputy city administrators pushing each of those service areas, each of the bureaus within each of the service areas to collaborate and talk to each other and make the trade-offs in their budget proposals. Do we have any of that in our objectives now to somehow, I don't say be a partner in, but be cognizant of and informed by the budget process that they're going through now? Does that make sense? Because I really don't know that we want to be in those discussions. On the other hand, we'd like to know how the current citizen committees are affecting budget requests or decisions or adapting to the 5% constraint placed on them at this stage and then subsequent stages. Is there any, after the bureaus and the service areas come up with their 6, I assume, proposals, then what process does the mayor have or the budget office for public input prior to these there's listening sessions, but are they running draft budget suggestions by a broader stakeholder community?
Fred, look, can I talk back at you? Because I'm
Yeah.
not sure. So were you suggesting that this group's recommendations about how to improve community engagement in the new city budget process should be informed by some kind of evaluation for how community engagement happens in the current and old city budget process?
Right. Yeah, I think so. That's good.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm with
Right.
you. I think
Right.
that could be in part of the vision. in my opinion.
Sure. It could be, it could be an objective phrase around that too, I suppose. But vision's fine. Just so that
Yeah,
we understand and that they communicate to us what their process historically has been, how they're changing it for this bridge budget, so that we can tell them, well, that ain't necessarily good enough. Or yeah, that's a great idea, but maybe have you thought about some other inputs from the citizen outreach and input? Okay.
thank you, Fred. Any other?
Yeah, just to Fred's point, it is a really good point in that, you know, there is a process out there and there are these entities out there and structures out there that they use currently for their community engagement. I mean, maybe that's part of another research project that we have. I mean, like, what are they? What do they do?
Right. I think that's in our homework assignments coming up. Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, though that'll be very informative, I hope. It may be disappointing, but we'll know what they do and what they don't do.
Zach, yeah.
I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves with the conversation about the stakeholders, but when I was reviewing that and making suggestions, what I had in mind was both we're asking and we'll be soliciting prospective ideas, but we're identifying also those who have been involved for retrospective understanding of what's working, what hasn't, and how the general community engagement involved in the budget making process can be improved. So I mean, maybe that's represented in the last objective, generally thinking about evaluation and feedback into the outreach. But
Mhm.
yeah, just
Yeah, that's true. We could probably just add a clause to that final objective that in this bridge time, it also includes like the old city budget process. Thank you for that. Anything else on what I'm calling goals, but vision, objectives, values? This can also evolve, right? But I think as we start thinking about proposed improvements to community engagement, we'll want to come back to these to check whether our proposals are doing the things that we set out to do. Okay, thank you. And thank you for the suggestion, Fred. We will make, at least for now, that change. Okay, peer city research. So this is a kind of homework assignment from meeting number 1. We go to the next slide, June, thanks. So initially, folks were asked to kind of consider other cities in relationship to the objectives and opportunities that the city budget office presented to us last week. Now, ours are probably more expansive based on the conversation that we just had, but I thought it was a helpful framework just as you do your Googling. So next slide, please. We had a list of cities. These are, you know, we could argue how peer ones are, but they are a list of cities that I think are have a pretty good breadth to them, and that the transition team and GTAC in various ways has used before. So we broke them up, and I just want to go city by city and have folks share what you found out from your research. Terry, I'm kind of haven't talked to you about this, but you know, I'm hoping that between this meeting and the next meeting, you know, Terry and I could work on putting some of these ideas onto a piece of paper that you all could consider at your next meeting. So we can, I think, take some responsibility for the drafting and sense making of what you share. And then I'm happy to model because I did Baltimore. So And I actually shared this at our last meeting because I had sort of pre-done this as an example, but I'll just say again, I would say Baltimore just has more kind of community-oriented information about their budget that is accessible on their website. They have an online dashboard that now I've realized many cities actually also have. And they put out a community guide to their budget that's, I think, pretty easy to understand. They also start their budget engagement much earlier in the year. So they had a series of listening sessions in late January and early February. So again, ours are mid-April, for example. So it's a pretty significant, I thought, timing difference. I'd also note that Baltimore uses outcomes-based budgeting, which is like Portland is shifting into. It wasn't super clear to me how that impacted their engagement, but it's a question I had by looking at theirs, that as Portland moves in that direction, what does it mean for community engagement? And then I'd also say that Baltimore's materials really distinguish capital budget from non-capital budget, and they have I doubt they're in like the budget office, but they have neighborhood liaison positions, probably similar to kind of something that would live in civic life in our space, that help do engagement around capital projects. And so again, I don't know what that means, but I was left with a question, like particularly as we start having districts, what does that mean for how engagement might look for capital projects? So just kind of a question mark. So my takeaways were definitely like, we need more accessible, like budget information that's made for community, like probably an online dashboard. Lots of cities have them, some sort of community guide to the budget. I'm sure there's many other ideas that other folks found. Also, I feel like a pretty clear proposal is earlier engagement, much earlier probably than what Portland is doing. And then again, I have sort of question marks about, outcomes-based budgeting and the relationship to future council districts. And, I was wondering, for example, like, will we be able to see the budget by district? I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't, but like, is that a thing? I have no idea. And then what does sort of districts mean for capital projects? Okay, so money was the two next ones. She did Denver, which is a city county combined government, and Washington, D.C. I know she said that Denver was much more community oriented than DC. So I'm just pulling up her thing. So yeah, similarly, I think Denver has some kind of online like checkbook type of tool. There's a community report that's condensed and simplified information. That sounds a little bit maybe like the community guide. There's something called Denver Peak, which is a process improvement team that trains and collaborates with government employees to improve the customer and employee experience. And so she says Transparent Denver. I'm imagining that's a website with accessible budget information. And this Denver Peak could be good models. Washington, D.C. I'll just skip to the bottom. Not a great model, very dry government website. So I'm not sure there's any great takeaways from that. I'm sorry, I'm like switching around here. Who's next? Fred was this, I think Fred was Philly, Santa Fe, Milwaukee, which you weren't able to do. Maybe Terry and I could split them up and see if there's anything.
Yeah, just check it out. I was just not able after the surgery to.
Totally understandable. I mean, does anyone want to know anything that they want to share that they might have experience with in Philly, Santa Fe, or Milwaukee by any chance? Okay. Blah, blah. No, Zach, I think we're on you.
And I have failed and certain forms of my duties on getting homework assigned
Oh, I forgot,
completed as
Terry.
well.
You took
Terry,
Zach.
you did some assistance. I think you looked at Seattle for me, which I appreciate your assistance on that. And I hope that, I mean, I know that we're going to be moving towards more homework assignments, but I'm hoping that there might be more opportunity to continue to look at some of these cities that haven't been looked at, including the ones that I have.
Terry, do you want to share what you did on the Seattle to Fresno? I don't know what you got done, but
Sure, I got some of this stuff done. I did total on my homework assignment. I did a couple of Zach's and then mine, and they start looking pretty similar a little bit. And some of them are very, very good, and some of them are very, very average. Um, and Seattle's was actually sort of the only one that I saw that was in between. But they have some pretty informative stuff on their websites. But it's very structured through the city council itself. The select budget committee on the city council is the budgeting entity. So all of the information and outreach and stuff sort of comes out of that budget committee. But they've got a great demystifying the budget process, a budget dashboard, glossary, a library for the budget documents. And it's all sort of there. The interesting part about Seattle is just this year, they are changing to a 2-year cycle. So this is the off year of their cycle, and they're just doing budget adjustments, which is a whole different thing. But I think that might have been why they ramped up some of the outreach and website stuff, is to explain that to citizens this year. The only other thing that I noticed of some interest was they had a specific Seattle City Council blog where they just, all of the council's stuff on all topics by all council members, whatever, sort of gets pushed out through that blog. And it was really kind of informative and it was easy to follow and found lots of stuff. And then on the formal side, they do things typically. They allow public comments in budget committee meetings and formal public hearings, and in staff presentations, and in budget overview presentations. So basically, they open that wide up. They do have like workshops where they may or may not take public comment, but they outline dedicated deliberation days where they just set those aside as this is just where we got to do our work. But they're noticed in advance, and the entire schedule is sort of set in advance. So anyway, that was Seattle.
thanks, Terry. Zach.
I was going to try to write it in a chat, but to my knowledge, most of Washington's governments are on a biennial setup already. So I guess when I saw your write-up, I was surprised to see that Seattle was only now moving towards that. But I also don't know if it's maybe just kind of like confusion and noise. Like I have a couple of contacts I can reach out to in Seattle that can hopefully give us some insight. Most of those cities, like I worked for a city of Kirkland in their financial planning office, and they'll do kind of a similar to what we have with the budget monitoring process, like a readjustment for each year. It's kind of like a short session essentially, but I don't know to what extent, like, because they're marching towards the like a full biennium, it just feels like it's new and different. But yeah, thank you for looking into it, Terry. I appreciate finding out, like, the demystifying the budget, and things of that nature. And I think there's obviously great opportunities for adding resources like that for city.
Thank you, Zach. So maybe Minneapolis, San Francisco, and Fresno, if we need to come back to. Is that accurate? Okay. Jose, Detroit at all?
Yes, Detroit actually of the cities I looked at probably had the best website. Um, they had a how your budget works section. They had FAQs, infographics, a glossary of terms, a reader's guide that broke down how to read the actual budget when it was released. They had a bunch of events listed so you can learn more. You could sign up for a newsletter. But it didn't specify if the newsletter was just for budget or just for city stuff, but there was a place there to sign up for a newsletter. They had forums in all the in each district to talk about the priorities, the budget priorities that were district specific. Then they also had what they call the revenue estimating conference that the public was invited to, and two annual public budget
Jose, I don't know if you can hear me, but you're cutting out. Could you try turning off your video?
There were videos of past meetings on the website. And so I refer to it your and
Oh, you're still cutting out, Jose.
what? Sorry?
Off and on. Julia
Yeah,
had
not sure what's happening. Is it better if I cut the video?
Yay.
Okay. I don't know what else you heard, but Detroit overall was the best one. Lots of service area specifics. Also was included in the documents that they showed. And like I was saying, everywhere you went, it talked about saying that the budget was like the people's budget and your budget, and to be involved with budget, which was kind of encouraging, to give more information.
Thank you, Jose. Fred.
Yeah, Jose, did you notice? I like that. This is the second time I've heard about having district budget hearings or meetings. That sounded like Baltimore is dealing with capital construction. I think that would, like with PBOT, would be very important. Maybe even Prosper Portland. But did the Detroit site show that there was any particular focus, like between operational budget versus capital expenditures by these district meetings?
No, I didn't see much of that because I don't think we're in the budget cycle. So the specifics about those meetings weren't posted. And I didn't go in and watch all these old meetings. I'm sure you might get a better sense, but there are some videos online. I think the district meetings are in person, so there weren't videos of those. But I'm not sure because some of the cities, if they're not currently they're in their budget process, you can find some information alluding to what they do, but you couldn't really find exactly what they did. You know what I mean?
Great, thank you. Jose, did you do Boston?
Yes, I did Boston, and Boston had an okay section. Let me look for it. Hold on real quick. They had, again, how budget works, a section on how to engage with the budget. They did have that information in a lot of languages right there, which I thought was great. Um, they made a lot of references to public hearings, but again, they were not in the budget process, so I couldn't find a lot of details, and the recordings were outdated from 2022. I do like that there was a couple places where they mentioned participatory budgeting, so I know they're at least doing some of that, but I couldn't find details as to how much of the budget is devoted to that. But I'm a big fan of participatory budgeting, so if we can devote some of our budget to that, I'd be super happy about it. Oh, and they had a reference that they had a budget specific meeting for the LGBTQ plus community. And it's the only time I've seen kind of like a specific group had a meeting for them. So I don't know if anyone else is doing that, but Boston did have that.
Thank you, Jose. Are you Indianapolis too?
Yes, Indianapolis and the next one, Atlanta. Those were both mine. I'll cover both of them because they were very limited. They were like Indianapolis had a lot of linked ordinance and budget documents, but no explanation on how to read them. They were just like, if you didn't know anything about budget, you'd open one of the documents and be like, what am I looking at, and close it and never to go back. So Indianapolis was horrible. There was nothing to help you at all, like nothing. And Atlanta was a tiny bit better because they had like a small text-based overview on the budget process, but it was like very small. It was just text, and then they had lots of links again with no explanation. I think my overall conclusion was let's not be like Indianapolis or Atlanta. So.
It's like Washington, D.C. Thank you, Jose. Thank you for doing your homework. Does anyone have any follow-up to Jose's or questions? Okay, Terry, you're up. You're muted though.
Okay, I guess we're on San Jose.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was like the first one that I did, and I thought it was very good, very interesting, and it turned out to be, after I'd done a couple of them, it was kind of average. But they had a decent website. They had a detailed budget calendar, again, set far in advance, and they had a very helpful budget process one-pager document, which I found very helpful. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward. They did put out an annual report, and I don't know if Portland does that or not. And there was a public hearing on the annual report for the city, which I think would be entertaining. Council hearings on the mayor's budget message. So that's like when the equivalent, I think, of our original mayor's budget memo very early in the process. And the next day, the city council holds a hearing on it, which can take public comment. So that's very early in the process. I would move on then to San Antonio, which I thought I had the most impressive outreach that I saw. They had a budget website, transparency website, the complete calendar, a budget engagement calendar. Why do they need a budget engagement calendar? Is because they have 9 in-person town halls, 1 in each district, plus 2 virtual meetings, all broadcast on cable and Facebook and YouTube. They had a separate town hall summary that you could review and read that had all of the comments listed, and then like a separate survey report, a separate survey that came with a survey report. And then an evaluation feedback process. The thing of it is I think this was all run out of their community engagement department in San Antonio. So this was a big intentional process that was centrally organized and then distributed into each of the districts. It was pretty impressive. They also had a website called San Antonio Speak Up, which was, again, run out of the engagement process that had just a comprehensive schedule of everything, a way to comment on everything on the schedule, and just made it very straightforward and simple. They also had a 5-year forecast and a trial budget public hearing. And that, again, I think is sort of in our Cal level process. And then just on the district-wide stuff, each of those district town halls was impressive with yard signs, flyers, comment cards. They had invited panels of witnesses from the districts and district nonprofits represented. They had door hangers, 15,000 door hangers, going door to door in English and Spanish. I mean, it was just a really impressive outreach. So that's San Antonio. Sacramento was typical to the others. The interesting part with Sacramento that I found, so speaking of participatory budgeting, is they just completed their pilot. And it didn't go well. So there's a whole final report on the participatory budgeting pilot, and it's probably worth reading to see how that kind of turns out. Their engagement process, 3 community meetings in different parts of the city and broadcast on cable and radio and streaming. One of the things they did in advance is very pointedly said that we have challenges this year. This is a tough budget year. There are going to be budget cuts. Come to the meeting and learn about it and show up because this is a big year, which I thought was great to see sort of substantive honesty rather than just generic show up for a budget meeting in the public engagement. Phoenix was similarly impressive to San Antonio in that they had a central community engagement effort. They had 9 in-person districted budget meetings. They had an online checkbook, an online budgeting tool where you could go in and tweak the budget yourself. If you wanted more revenue in some area, you could go tweak it and see what would happen. Likewise, if you wanted to increase spending in some area, you could see what that did with the rest of the budget, which was interesting. What else? Again, they had a budget library that had all the archives and reports and every document you could think of. But again, centralized in-district hearings. And then they had, I think it's similar to our Cal estimates early in the process, but they call it a trial budget. Just sort of they throw out a very early budget very early in the process. It can sort of be something that people can comment on very early. So that's that. The other one I did for Zach was Fresno, and let me just scroll back to that. That was another one that we can put in the do not replicate file. Theirs was so opaque that I could not find anything. That I had to actually literally go to news media coverage of their process to determine what the process was. And the process was so bad that they got sued over transparency. So, my guess is to not replicate. That's my research.
Thank you, Terry. Any questions for Terry? Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should all be San Antonio and not Fresno. But
That's the takeaway.
I would be interested in seeing what Sacramento thought it was going to get to pull off and find out. Did they assess how they failed or how they can do better with a?
And there's a report that I linked to in the document that I'll pull out and maybe send
Great.
around if you're interested.
Right.
It was pretty comprehensive.
Good. Yeah. So maybe not make the same mistakes that they did or something. But I had a question about, I thought that the budget office staff had been doing Peer City research as well. And that might inform their concepts of how to proceed or alter the Portland's budget process, especially in regards to community engagement. Is that true, Julia?
Yeah, I've received a couple things actually from the budget office and a couple of things from the city outside of the budget office related to this work. And so after today's meeting, I'm going to send those to you with the ask that you actually all, myself included, that we all read them before the next meeting to see if it changes anything about how we're thinking about this work.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yes.
Good. Yeah, I want to stay in touch with them.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So I was the last city. I did Austin. I would also put Austin in the positive category, where I thought they were doing some interesting things. A lot of it is now becoming repetitive from what promising practices that other folks have mentioned. Just a lot more community-oriented information. They have a website specific to community engagement in the budget process, which I thought was pretty cool. They use Balancing Act as their online tool. It seems it's the one I keep running across the most often, but it does what Terry was saying of some other city where it's like, spend less here and spend more here and your checkbook is unbalanced, pretty interactive. Austin also does budget town halls by district. Nothing new there. I guess the thing that seemed the most unusual from other cities that I've looked at or heard about, and I might need to find out a little bit more about it, but there's like a pretty significant role of advisory bodies in the city's budget process, by which I do not mean bureau budget advisory committees, like non-budget specific advisory bodies within their city, right? So like, I don't know, name one. GTAC is an advisor, but their advisory bodies draft written budget recommendations, and then the relevant department or bureau that advisory body sits in writes written responses, and then they publish it all as a report. So like the Government Transition Advisory Committee recommends in this upcoming budget process increased money for council staffing and money for community engagement around district offices, whatever the recommendations are. And GTAC lives in the Office of Management and Finance, right? So like the Office of Management and Finance has to provide a written response about like, thank you, we're making this request in our requested budget for these reasons, or thank you very much, we're not, or we're doing partial and partial not for these reasons. I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know how it worked, I don't know what the evaluation of that is, but I hadn't seen that anywhere else. And then I think like Jose mentioned, I think when he was talking about Boston, they also have town halls by what they called like their inclusion committees. So I have a sense that they are culturally specific or community specific advisory bodies that then have a town hall, right? Like for that community to say, what are like sort of your hopes and or concerns about the upcoming budget process? And then there's a sort of joint report that comes out documenting those findings. So just kind of like a little bit of a question mark to me, but sort of this relationship between advisory bodies and the budget, but not the way I think I was sort of accustomed to thinking, which is about these budget specific advisory committees. But what about all the other 100 advisory committees that aren't budget specific? So anyway, I think interesting, some things to take away from Austin. I wouldn't put it in the, what was it, the Fresno bucket. I think there's maybe some lessons to learn there. So those were the cities. Certainly I think to Zach's point earlier, like just because we did this exercise doesn't mean we need to stop. So we can fill in the gaps of some of the cities here we didn't do. We can look at other cities, right? These are not the only cities in the United States, or we can look at non-US cities. So I think this is an evolving practice. You'll see some of the research that the city budget office did. Before we move on to stakeholders, any final reflections, things that your brain is now thinking about having heard all of that?
I guess I'd reiterate too that after you do a few of them, there are the ones that do just sort of a mundane legislative process and with mundane city websites. And once you like look at that city and realize that's what it is, I think you can probably move on in your research. And then the other ones that are just really good are worth poking at. So if we continue researching some things, that would be my approach to it. So don't spend too many weeks.
Thank you, Terry. Any other thoughts, reflections? Thank you to folks for sharing the work that you did. I think it's really helpful. The couple that I did, I learned and some interesting things that made my brain go places it hadn't before. So appreciate it. So let's go to the next slide. This is kind of our final substantive thing to talk about before we talk about next steps and maybe take on some homework assignments. Stakeholder engagement. So I want to be clear that this is about April. So this is early stakeholder engagement. We will, along with other parts of GTAC, we're going to release a whole package of draft recommendations in June and spend the whole summer engaging community about what they think, right? And I imagine in some ways it might be easier for community to react when they see the draft recommendations, right? I love this, I hate this, what were you thinking? You know, so I really want you to think about, for right now, which stakeholders, if any, do you want to prioritize engaging over the next, 5 weeks to draft your initial recommendations? That doesn't mean we can't be capturing stakeholders that we want to make sure we do targeted outreach to in the summer. That's also useful. But really thinking about, and also from a capacity standpoint, who do you really want to talk to? Who do we have time to talk to in that period of time before your draft recommendations? So next slide, please. Thank you to work group members who looked at the list of stakeholders. I have not edited your edits in any way. So the The column on the left is like any stakeholder ideas that we've talked about, and the column on the right is potential methods of engagement. Before we talk about the methods, though, which obviously vary by stakeholder group, I want us to talk about the stakeholders. And again, with a focus on, who do you want to engage in April? And we might have to kind of do some prioritizing if we don't have the capacity to do all of the engagement. But you've reflected on kind of what the vision, values, and objectives are. So I'm just gonna, pause and let's talk through stakeholder identification. Zach.
Well, I know that there's a potential of it being problematic to prioritize this group, but I do think for our own self-learning about what processes exist, trying to reach out to the stakeholders who have been involved in the budget process to date and getting that evaluative piece might be helpful. I do think we should, to the extent possible, also get some prospective communities engagement prior to forming recommendations. But I just feel like there's a lot we can learn to know the nuance of what programs exist versus how they are implemented, and whether it's an implementation problem over let's just come up with new strategies because they sound good and the implementation is still just kind of not there. And maybe that would suggest a recommendation that we put more resources towards improving the implementation side of things versus the restructuring the engagement. So that's just my initial thoughts. And maybe there's a balance to strike there, but I do think that I, at least personally, will have a lot to learn from people who have been involved in the budget process and understanding what their takes are and how they engage with the budget to date.
So Zach, can I just repeat back to you to make sure I understand? So on the list that's here, which you can absolutely add to, it's not meant to be exhaustive in any way. You would be talking about people who come to current budget listening sessions, people who serve on the citywide or bureau-specific budget advisory committees, and community organizations that have engaged in the city budget process.
Yeah, I would say the first half of those bullets, I think, is a really important early information gathering stakeholder group, going down to maybe even the Civic Life Budget Advisory Committee's liaison. And, we can also approach this from the sense of some of these stakeholder groups don't need the level of a lot of capital of our time to gather the insight. We can maybe after one or two conversations start to understand and piece together what a good survey instrument and what kind of questions we should be asking of the broader groups, and then just use a survey instrument. But I think from an evaluative standpoint, it would be helpful to know what kind of questions we should be, how we might be framing questions so that we can use some kind of the nomenclature that exists, because every city has its own little quirks, and I don't know if I know Portland's quirks well enough.
Thank you, Zach. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree that we need to learn more about from the folks that have been engaged in the budget process and whether they are happy, feel satisfied, or they feel that their input's not been taken into account. I think looking back at the last meeting's notes, it sounded like I had brought up applicants of budget advisory committees as a stakeholder group. I'm not sure I said that, but I'm not sure that they're as relevant as those who have been appointed by, bureau directors or by the council, and what their role has been, who they are, what their relationship with their respective bureaus has been, and that would advise us, instruct us a lot, especially as they're probably all going to go by the wayside, and there would be 6 service area budget advisory committees. I am concerned about and I believe they've been involved in the budget process, certainly the downtown group that has the district, the special district for cleaning and security, et cetera. I'm sure they're quite involved in the budget process, but I put in large scale utility customers because they probably have the most at stake at rate changes. They are. We can't forget that they and the business community generally, including minority and women-owned small business groups, are our economic engine, and that Portland is on the list of potential doom loop communities. And so the more we can engage the community in what investments we can make as a community through the city, as well as other government entities, is going to be an important aspect of how we enrich our community's understanding of our resources and grow, not necessarily upward, but as we progress onward.
Thank you, Fred. Fred, so I put it in the chat while you were talking, but I think Zach was the one who added applicants of budget advisory committees. So Zach, I might come back to you in a second and see if you're willing to share your thinking around that.
Okay.
Fred, on your additions at the bottom, would you say that is groups you would prioritize us engaging in April in this early engagement, or a stakeholder?
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, I could just call John DiLorenzo, who's the attorney for the large water users, and has, I think, probably been the attorney for the Portland Harbor cleanup business coalition, because they're the ones that sue the city. They got the money and they got most at stake, so they sue. And so it'd be interesting to see what input their collaboration they'd want to have, whether they want to let the general citizenry have more input, or what would forfend them from suing the city, because they were given some input and understood what the constraints were that the city was operating under, et cetera, et cetera. So but I don't think that's a lot of research. It's just getting an understanding of their perspective. Now, I think, yeah, we could do it. I don't see where I can chat to share everyone. It's not an option on my chat menu. June, is that something that I'm just not seeing, or it's not there? But I appreciate reading everyone else's comments.
You should be able to now, but take a look. Thank you, Fred. Terry.
Just a little bit of follow-up with Fred and Zach. I mean, I don't have many people in a Rolodex, so I don't really have specific people in mind when I think about stakeholders. And then, so when I saw this list as it was being populated in the document, it was struggling between, well, this is an engagement. We want to talk to people about engagement in the process, not the process itself. Although to me, it's like the people who are not engaging in the process itself are the people that I want to be a stakeholder in our engagement discussion. And so, anyway, that's what my thinking was. And then I just didn't get down to doing the thinking itself. Things like, for example, retirees. They have a huge city retirees. have a huge stake in budget decisions and funding retirements and that sort of thing. Sectors of the public, you know, the unions of public workers in dealing with parks and maintenance and PBOT maintenance and that sort of thing, who have good understanding of what the budget issues are in the city. You know, and then are those the ones in April or are they the ones in the summer? I don't know that answer either, but I think this is just a hard question. And maybe we start with these folks early on, but I want to be open to who is not participating and understanding what would make their lives better.
Yeah, I mean, Terry, I agree with you. You know, I think it's that is who we need to hear from, and it is going to take more effort and time, right? Precisely because they're the folks choosing or for other reasons not engaging. I think we might be hard pressed to get to those folks in April. But I think if we focus on, I think Zach's framing was pretty helpful to me, just as a way, like for those who do engage, you know, what's maybe the problems that we're trying to solve for, to the extent they are problems with the engagement opportunities. But I think we're gonna have to do a lot more thinking about how to reach the folks that Terry's talking about, and planning for that before we get to the summer. Any other stakeholders that folks want to identify as early April engagement? Fred.
Oh, yeah, Zach had his hand up too, but I put it in the note to everyone. I know that you know, the largest share of cities' expenditures, at least in the operations side, is for employees, and that union negotiators are watching what's going on and probably are very well informed through the city's negotiators, but is there a general, do we know that? And what is the dynamic there, especially for employee awareness and engagement in the process, whether through their union representatives or, you know, generally as employees overall, or as residents of the city?
Thanks, Fred. Zach.
So, my initial thoughts, and I'm having like second thoughts about it, but was, you know, we're doing general voter education outreach, meeting with groups and getting in front of people, and so where appropriate, where we feel like we have enough of a dialogue where we can be kind of identifying what people's interests are, we can say that we're doing this work. And you know, my hesitation in sharing that is that I think there's, I mean, I'm experiencing it personally, like a certain level of burnout with engagement of trying to get people's input. And, you know, for example, our listening sessions on city operations, you know, it's just, there's a lot being thrown at a lot of people, and there's a lot of time and input being requested that's non-compensatory. There's no compensation for it. And so I just wanted to flag that there is that challenge, and to what extent we can maybe try to ad hoc get some insights. I think it should be worth our while to try to flag that with folks that we've already talked to, or the folks that we plan to talk to in the next month or two.
Thank you, Zach. Okay, so I think I'm hearing, I don't know if I bold this, if it'll bold, maybe June, if you hit refresh. So engagement focusing on the attendees of upcoming budget sessions, members of the citywide and bureau specific, budget advisory committees, applicants, city staff for those committees, and a civic life budget advisory committees liaison. And I guess hanging out there, engagement.
Julia, you're cutting out a bit.
In reps. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's probably because you got a new program up.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Where did you lose me?
You were just explaining, we caught is that you were explaining that you have bolded those groups that we were discussing. And I think from there,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so would folks be comfortable if this was sort of our targeted stakeholder list for April engagement? I'm going to be honest, like, I have no idea if we even have contact information for some of these people. So like, that will be on me to go find out. My guess is it's not as easy to get as one might hope. Also, certainly if we're going to ask any questions of people who attend listening sessions 20 days from now, that's going to take some effort about how we get in touch with those folks. But for this list, if people are generally okay with it, I know Zach maybe expressed his opinions earlier, but what would be the methods of engagement that you would want to use? And Zach, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you were suggesting a survey tool for these groups. But Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed early on, I guess maybe 8 months ago or so, and I started looking at advisory committees because when we were snubbed by the mayor and council, that was reported, and some commenter in Willamette Week said, "Oh, just like all the other advisory committees that the city appoints and then ignores anything they say," and so I kind of went to advisory committee. I think maybe your suggestion, Julia, of how to find out what advisory committees are there, and there's like 78 of them. 17 or so are bureau budget advisory committees. Some of them are defunct. They're just like one time only, but they're still on the website. And the city's got a great encyclopedia or index, if you will, of all of those advisory committees, who the chair is. There's like profiles, like there are profiles of us on GTAC, there are as well on those. So you could go to the bureau budget advisory, go to advisory committees on your search engine and find out who's on each of these budget advisory committees, and then find out from budget management who the bureau liaison is to those committees. And then we know who to survey. Now, how we survey, whether it's interview or just a standard yes, no, what pains you, what excites you about your current involvement, whatever. I'll leave that to better folks than I to design, but that would be, but that's one way we find at least those, the staff and the bureau advisory committees. And it's certainly the citywide budget advisory committee is also on that list. I'm not aware of the civic life budget advisory. It looks like multiple committees. Is that like with neighborhood coalitions, or is that's something I'm not familiar with? But.
Yeah, let me speak quickly, and Zach, I'll turn it to you. So I think we actually all learned from our first work group meeting that the city budget office doesn't have a relationship with the bureau budget advisory committees. I remember them specifically saying that.
Yeah.
So that's not a way to get to them. There is a staff person at Civic Life. I just learned this, by the way, like 4 days ago. Apparently there's a staff person at Civic Life who I'm sure has many jobs. One of which is the Civic Life liaison two budget advisory committees. So I will certainly reach out. I mean, I'll do the best I can to track down the information. I wanted to see which stakeholders you all wanted to prioritize first, and I will do my best to get the information. Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I think some mixed methods would be ideal in this work, because I would imagine that for survey response rate, we should anticipate single digits and percentile of people who will actually follow through and respond. So the more directed outreach is going to probably have a little bit better success rate. So yeah, going back to Fred's point and Julia's point, like actually successfully getting a hold of contact information is going to be maybe challenging. But if we can, then we can maybe make a couple of choice directed requests, maybe to designated chairs or something that we know they maybe had a much more intimate involvement, or they can pass us to somebody else that they think would be a good candidate for an interview. But having some mixture would be really useful for information gathering.
Yeah, and I'll say on behalf of Money, who isn't here, she left a comment in the stakeholder list document, wondering if we shouldn't sort of prioritize chairs or co-chairs of some of these Bureau budget advisory committees who may be more engaged and maybe just, I don't want to speak for her, she didn't say this much about it, but maybe more likely to kind of respond and share their input with folks. Seeing some head nods about that. So I'm going to move on to next steps, if that's okay. Thank you. So June, if you could maybe go to one more. The dreaded homework slide. I never know what to call this. Here's one back. So here's what I'm proposing, but tell me what you think. So first, as I mentioned earlier, I think Terry and I, and Terry, if you don't want to, I can probably help, start drafting some possible ideas about improving community engagement in the budget process based in large part on the Pierce City research, and please continue to share thoughts about that, but also on what we learned from the city, both in the last meeting and some documents I'm about to send to you. And then for all work group members, reading city documents that I will send out probably today. And there's 4 of them. I don't think they're super long. There's 2 from the city budget office. One is about sort of what is the function of the budget. It has some of the information Fred was looking for earlier. And then they also have a draft written community engagement plan. It's really kind of the written of what they shared verbally in our first meeting, but I think it's helpful to have in writing. And then there's a couple other reports that I've learned about. There's a budget advisory work group review report. So I haven't read it, but let's all read it before we decide what we're asking, because maybe it's already been asked and answered. I can't tell you what it says yet because I haven't looked at it. And then there's also what I think is probably an older guidelines for public involvement in the Bureau budget advisory committees, which I think we should take a look at too, but I can't speak to that. And then beyond the reading, and probably after you do the reading, if folks could try to identify 3-ish questions that you'd want to ask each of these stakeholder groups. And then when we come back next time, we can all reflect on the proposed improvements to community engagement, and we can try to solidify the questions that we want to ask stakeholders. All in the meantime, work on how we get in touch with these folks part. How does that sound? Does that sound doable? Okay. Thank you for that. I will send an email out kind of reminding you what to do. And thank you for doing some work in between meetings. I do appreciate it. So next slide, please. So this is the upcoming meetings we have. There is this week our 2 final community listening sessions that the Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee is co-hosting. There's one tomorrow night in person in East Portland and a virtual one Thursday. So come hang out. Terry and I were in the same small group last week. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's actually been kind of swirling around in my head since then. The Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee next meets on March 28th. This group is going to meet the week of April 1st. There is a doodle poll. If you haven't done it, I'll just ping you. I think I'm waiting on 1 or 2 of you. I would like to get that scheduled as soon as possible so you know how much time you have to do your homework. The next voter and candidate education and outreach subcommittee is April 2nd. And then the next full GTAC meeting is April 9th. We have 1 minute left. Questions, concerns, things to share.
Julia, we just had a quick question in the chat or the Q&A, just for the work group, these documents you're sending out, will you also be posting them online?
I can post all of them that are finalized. I would need to check with the budget office on the draft engagement plan. But anything that's done is a public document. So yes, thank you for the question. It is 1:30. I hope folks get to enjoy a little bit of sun today. Thank you so much for the time, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.